listen, taxpayers of the number one venture capitalists in the world, taxpayer money funded the internet, GPS, all kinds of technological breakthroughs. And so my point is that if taxpayer money went and helped a breakthrough and private companies are making tons of money on that, should be shared with the venture capitalist taxpayers who helped fund it. So I was in the Marine Corps wearing the greatest uniform, serving my country, prepared to die, but I wasn't allowed to own private equity. We have a Department of Defense that hasn't passed an audit in a decade. And President Trump said he wants to increase the spending for the military by $500 billion to $1.5 trillion. That's fine, right? I'm pro-military, but let's pass an audit. Listen to everybody. If a little Twitter back and forth is going to stop people from, having love for each other, then they never had love for each other to begin with.
What's going on, family and friends? In this next video, I'm coming to you from Boston, where it was about 30 degrees outside, which is something that my SoCal blood is naturally not built for. Yes, my bed has basically been an economy seat on United for the past week. My back hurts. But still, when the conversation matters, we show up, and this conversation that I want to frame for you today matters a lot. I interviewed John Deaton at the recent Beyond Broke Mastermind meetup in Boston. What stood out wasn't just policy talk or campaign energy, it was John's perspective. We're living through a moment where the rules of money, ownership, and access are being rewritten in real time, where entire systems, financial, regulatory, even political, are being stress tested in public without many people even realizing it. And for decades, a lot of people were told the same thing. You don't qualify, you're not accredited, this opportunity isn't for you. That's what this conversation is really about. It's about who gets to own assets in a world where money is being inflated away. It's about why innovation, funded by taxpayers, should return value back to the people. And it's about how technologies like blockchain, tokenization, and AI aren't just buzzwords, they're tools to remove friction, reduce human error, and bring transparency to systems that desperately need it. John and I talked about housing affordability, we talked about energy costs, we talked about private equity, one of the greatest wealth generators over the past 30 years, and why most Americans have been locked out. And we talked about the elephant in the room. What happens when systems that were once human dependent become automated, auditable, and fair by design? Because whether you're a builder, an investor, a mechanic, a truck driver, or someone who's just trying to get ahead, we don't want handouts, we want access, we want to participate. So this video isn't about hype, it's not about tribalism, and it's definitely not left versus right. This is about solutions, this is about ownership, and it's about making sure that the next generation doesn't look back and say, yeah, they had the tools, but they didn't have the courage to use them. So let's get into my interview with John Deaton, the white knight of the XRP community. Thanks for tuning in. Love you mucho. What's going on, family and friends? We're here in Boston, Massachusetts for John Deaton's rally, the future senator of Massachusetts. John just came off stage here, rallying the troops, sharing some really interesting, I would say, policies that you're trying to implement for the greatest country in the world. Absolutely. And then also for the greatest people in the world as well. Some people that have been left behind, others that just never had a seat at the table. And so I'd love to dive into some of your policies, John, what your objective is. You ran last year. What's going to be different this year?
Well, this different, I'm going to win. That's the first difference.
There we go.
The big difference is I have the endorsement of the Mass GOP, which means I don't have a primary opponent. Ed Markey does have a primary opponent. If I get the same amount of votes that I got last time, I would win because turnout's lower. I had 1.35 million people vote for me last time. So it's just building on that momentum. I think people in Massachusetts, really Massachusetts is ground zero in all the crises we face: affordability crisis, energy crisis, housing crisis. And so I think they're starving for someone fresh with new ideas. You can't just run on the other guy's old and been there a long time and problems. You got to run on solutions. Yeah. And I think that's one big difference. I'll be a lot more policy oriented this time. Like let me give you some real fresh ideas to people.
Yeah, one of those ideas you mentioned was the innovation dividend. Yep. Do you mind touching on that?
Yeah, listen, taxpayers of the number one venture capitalists in the world, taxpayer money funded the internet, GPS, all kinds of technological breakthroughs. And so my point is that if taxpayer money went and helped a breakthrough and private companies are making tons of money on that, should be shared with the venture capitalist taxpayers who help fund it. I'll give you an example. Harvard makes gets about $600 million a year. Despite having a near $60 billion endowment, they get $600 million a year in taxpayer money. They then have a breakthrough. It could be in biopharmacy or something like that. They then license that to the big companies and collect 150, 200 million. But our money helped fund it. So how come 1-2% isn't going to innovation fund and we get dividends back? So it would be our taxpayer dollars help fund this technology. That's giving people a real, they're vested in capitalism. They're vested in innovation. So that's one idea for sure.
I think an ROI on our tax efforts is common sense. Another thing that you mentioned as well on the same, I would say the same theme, is owning assets. As we move in this world where things are underpinned by blockchain infrastructure, liquid investments, liquid markets, what are your thoughts on this evolution of the accredited investor rules, these private capital markets in general?
Yeah, great question. We first have to greatly reform or completely abolish the accredited investor rule. Now we have Larry Finks of the world, you cover this, the tokenization of real world assets. All stocks are going on the blockchain. They're talking about 24/7 trading. So there's going to be much more access. And so if we can give access to regular people, what I was pointing out was I didn't become an accredited investor, Ray, until I'm in my late 40s. So I was in the Marine Corps wearing the greatest uniform, serving my country, prepared to die, but I wasn't allowed to own private equity, right? I couldn't own shares of Ripple. I couldn't own shares of SpaceX because I didn't have enough money or I didn't make enough money. That's insane. Yeah. And so we have to, private equity is one of the best wealth generators in the last 30 years. Owning assets have been the people that have done the best. When you inflate the money and debase it the way they do, asset appreciation goes up. They're going to be printing trillions of dollars. It's predicted. Why do you think gold, silver, Bitcoin, XRP, everything's going to go up? Real estate. And so people who don't own things are excluded. Wealth gap gets worse. People start turning to socialism because they feel like they haven't participated. So expanding those markets to regular people, you're a mechanic and you can own private equity in SpaceX, right? That's a great thing. We have to give people the opportunity to build wealth in this country.
On the topic of wealth, I'd love to double click on something that's a common denominator between us both, which is the Linqto developments. We'll circle to that to the very end, if you don't mind. Yeah. I'd like to touch on, you mentioned that Massachusetts is dead last in a lot of these KPIs. Do you mind double clicking on that and talk about how you aspire to reform their current situation?
Right. Okay. So Massachusetts is dead last in housing affordability. We pay 106% higher housing costs than the national average. We're dead last in private sector job growth. We pay nearly twice electricity usage than other states do. 75% higher natural gas, 30% higher groceries. So when you add that up, we're stagnant at worst. And we have MIT, we have Harvard, we have Tufts, we have Mass General. We've got some of the greatest institutions in the world, yet these are the numbers that we have. And so, we have a housing crisis. And so what's the number one way to solve a housing crisis is to build housing. It takes 2 years to pull permits, right? That makes no sense. So we got to deregulate all this red tape. I have an idea of taking federal property that is like military bases that's no longer being used and converting that into housing. You can undercut by partnership with private developers. States should be doing that. Massachusetts should be doing that with state land that's not being used as well. There's ways that if you really want to fix things, you just come from a common sense perspective, you can do it.
Yeah. Coming from California and with post these LA fires, we're hearing all these rumors about funding not going to where it needs to go. FEMA and I don't want to name names around, Gavin Newsom, but it seems like there's entities or individuals that are keeping real opportunity to getting where it needs to be. What are your thoughts on the developments in California and FEMA and just for instance, if for our tax dollars or for FEMA funding, if we're spending or expect $7 billion to go to those that are impacted by the fires and that funding isn't, What are your thoughts? Because here we are, we're also, another common denominator is an entity like Ripple Labs, like you mentioned, where liquidity can get from A to B in seconds for fractions of a penny. What are your thoughts on the developments of government funding and the evolution and the intersection of blockchain infrastructure?
Well, I think that first of all government spending should be on the blockchain. We have a Department of Defense that hasn't passed an audit in a decade. And President Trump said he wants to increase the spending for the military by 500 billion, so 1.5 trillion. That's fine, right? I'm pro-military, but let's pass an audit. All the 75 or 78 billion dollars reported in fraud, potentially in California. We're seeing all the fraud come out of Minnesota that's being exposed. Before politicians start talking about raising your taxes, like in California, they're talking about a wealth tax. Rokana and others, right, are saying, oh, they want to seize unrealized gains. Before you do that, how about you just look at the government spending we have right now and find the fraud, waste, and abuse, because that might solve your problem. And you're running at deficits. Even Massachusetts runs at a deficit. We have a $120 billion deficit.
Wow.
We shouldn't have that. This year, the governor spent $3 billion more than we took in revenue. If you run a business, if Brad Garlinghouse ran Ripple that way, he wouldn't be CEO. Yeah. Right? I'm just saying we have to run government in a similar fashion that we run, private businesses.
All right, John. For the elephant in the room between us is, and a lot of people, there's no beef between John and I.
Absolutely none.
There is none, John. You know I got nothing but mutual love for you, sir.
Same here, brother.
Thank you. I've seen you. I've seen Brad Garlinghouse cheering your name while you're in the rafters.
Listen to everybody. If a little Twitter back and forth is going to stop people from having love for each other, then they never had love for each other to begin with. So it's silly.
I appreciate that, John. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Well, ultimately, you're representing 4,000 real people that have been affected by the Linqto developments in this bankruptcy. I'm just over here representing myself, trying to be a prose actor, doing my thing. And the reason why I have to
You're handling your business?
I'm exactly right. I'm handling my business because this is private equity, and my claims posturing might be a little bit different than yours in your court. So that's it.
No one should ever take issue with you for fighting for what you believe in and fighting for what you deserve, right? And so I would never, even if there's posturing that's a little bit different for like the clients I'm representing versus someone in your position. It doesn't mean that you hold it against the person.
Yeah.
Like this whole Linqto situation is unfortunate, and people who worked hard, right? People like you who worked hard, who didn't participate in anything, shouldn't be screwed. Period. And so I don't blame you for fighting for what you deserve or believe in.
Oh, thank you for that, John. But one thing after going to the Wharton event and hearing about agentic, the developments in agentic AI and all of this is, with this SPV manager, what if, what if some of these pitfalls, if it's human dependent, could be replaced by an AI? So in the event, if we come to a liquidity event, if it's not dependent on Joe Smo to send the liquidity, what if it's automated? So when certain things hit the market, like maybe an S1 filing, things become automated and that's what happens. What are your thoughts?
I think I'm completely in favor of it because you take the human error out of it. SPVs that should be moved, to a certain location. If it's automated, if it's done on smart contracts, blocks, whatever it's done, if you take that out of it, then I think there's more certainty. And so I think that's where we're headed. I watched one of your shows when you were talking about it on X. I think that is the future, and I think it's a great idea because if you look at Linqto, you as SPV owner and former employee with stock options and all that, you shouldn't be at the mercy of a Bill or a Dan, right? I'm just saying, you should be entitled to what you're entitled to.
Yeah.
End of story. And same thing for customers. Unfortunately, when you're at the mercy of people, you're at the mercy of the decisions they make. And they might make a different decision than you or I would make. And if the Linqto scenario, I think it's fair to say that whether it's previous management or current management, they probably made decisions Ray or John wouldn't have made. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's why it's just a, excuse my French, but it's just a fucked up, scenario. But
I think it could set precedents, but it
we
also
can learn from it. And we can improve it, right? And the things you're talking about, we can say, hey, let's make sure that customers, people like you, are not victimized by a flawed system by improving that system. Yeah. Automation, maybe that's the key.
Yeah, I think so. And it was funny because while I was sitting in the front row at the Wharton event, and they're talking about the developments of, or who's going to be picked for the Fed seats under Trump's regime, and it's who's going to be picked for the board for Linqto, and it's just so much of that. Even it relates, but it's different, but it relates. It preps you. I don't want to say training wheels for the greater political campaign and world, but it's just so much of this relates. I don't want to say that crypto is an onboarding thing for banking and politics, but it sure does rev the engines for a lot of things that are going on in this world.
No, it does, and you see it playing out. You're seeing in the Clarity Act, you're seeing traditional finance fighting, the evolution that's eventual. And they go from fighting to adopting it is what I think. But I would love for a scenario to take the Linqto case example, because when you talk about the things we've been talking about, 24/7 trading, tokenizing private equity and expanding it to customers, let's do it in a way that's going to protect those customers, and I think that's the way. You might be on board of starting a company yourself there. I mean,
he's got jokes.
I'm just saying is that there's be a lot of people attracted to that, because we do want to give regular people access to private equity markets. I mean, that's for sure. And the way that the new SEC chair, Paul Atkins, is talking, and the way Larry Fink's talking, everything's getting tokenized, everything's going on the blockchain. If we're going to have 24/7 trading, then it implies that a truck driver, an auto mechanic, an electrician, a masseuse, doesn't matter, would be able to no longer be subject to the accredited investor rule and have access to that. So let's do it in a way that prevents them from being harmed.
Yeah, well, I think via a test or some type of improvements from the current situation, that's inevitable. John, for those, if you don't mind, before I let you go, for those that might be interested in learning more about the tokenization movement, where's a good place for them to get started?
Follow you.
Thank you for that.
This technology is obviously here to stay, and I think that 5 years from now, you'll be interviewing Senator Deaton, and I'll still be doing interviews for you, and we'll be talking about how far we progressed. Maybe it'll be one of those ideas of yours.
You'll still be answering my calls on that same cell number.
I sure will. Absolutely.
Now, for those that want to participate in your journey and your political campaign, where's the best place for them to get started, sir?
To go to johndeatonforsenate.com and donate whatever you can. Listen, if it's $100, it's $100. It helps. If you can do more, do more. We can win this race. You can put one of us in a U.S. Senate seat, and that's who you are. I'm one of you, trust me.
Yeah, he's one of us. The white knight of the XRP community. John Deaton, thank you very much for your service, your continued service, and just always being a beacon of respect and leadership, and of course just a good steward. And so thank you very much, sir. Love you mucho.
Love you back, man. Thank you.
Out of nowhere comes a ray of sunshine, and that sunshine is named John Deaton. John Deaton, Jeremy Hogan, James Filan. I know Jeremy and James are here somewhere. You guys are freaking awesome. Like, honestly, I watched your videos as soon as they came out. I'm like, all right, let me understand what's going on.